Hello. Wow, slightly better turnout this week than last week. That's always gratifying. Better room. Must be the room. That's what did it.
We've got a few minutes though, if that's okay.
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, get 5 minutes. So, welcome to everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here. Now, how many of you were here for last week's? Oh, okay. That's pretty good. Excellent. You know, I'm sorry I don't have, I handed out some, a glossary of political jargon last week, just a one-page handout. And I should have brought more with me today, but I didn't. But next week I'll bring some more. So if anyone didn't get that one-page handout, I can have some more here next week.
I could make some copies also. Well,
Oh.
It'll take a few minutes, but
Sure.
I have them for the end.
Wonderful. All right, thank you. That'd be great. So, anyone know any good jokes? Yes. Not a joke.
It's actually when you copy on one page in,
Oh,
it's two-sided,
right.
alphabetical. If you took items that I would probably spend a half hour telling you what one item was, you did it in 1 sentence. So like 26 of them.
You're very kind. Let me tell you, it took me, thank you, it took me, months to put that together. Yeah, going over all these different poli-sci books and comparing definitions, one professor to another. So it took a long time to assimilate that. But thank you for noticing. Yeah. Well, we still got 2 more minutes. Did I tell, some of you I may have said this last week. I have a friend who lives in New York City, and he called me like a couple of weeks ago, and he said, AI, artificial intelligence technology, it's here. He says, it's here, and it's got a mind of its own. It's taken over. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, I was driving in the city, and I saw a driverless car, and it gave me the finger. I said, wow, that's pretty ominous. That's when you know they're thinking just like humans. So, now in this talk, well, we're going to get into this talk in a moment. But in next week's talk, just to jump ahead a little bit, we will be looking at the state of the world. Today's talk, we're going to be focusing on America. But in next week's talk, we're going to take the whole world into consideration. And we're going to try to make sense of the political condition of our planet today. Why things are so screwed up today in the world at large. So I hope you can be here for that one. But we still have a minute to go. And I'm going to tell you one more joke. This is my nephew, my great nephew. He wants to be a comedian. He's like 14 years old. And he came up, he told me this guy walks into a psychiatrist's office and he's got a duck on his head, a quack, quack duck. And he walks in and the psychiatrist looks at him, looks at the guy and says, "What? Can I do anything for you?" And the duck says, "Yeah, can you get this guy off my ass? That's 14-year-old humor for you right there." His humor is still clean, and that's why I love it. It's still, he hasn't gotten really raunchy yet, so that's good. He's still an innocent, So, are we good to go?
Got a second career, I think. But it's spot on time, so go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you all again for being here today. So, yes, we're going to dive right in. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. So, this is part 2 of our 3-part series. And in today's talk, we've set aside a really daunting task. Why are politics in America so divisive and so disputatious? Right? We see it on the news every night, protests and people screaming at each other, and it gets so ugly and so hostile. Why is it like this? There are countries in the world, I know this is hard to believe, but there are countries in the world where there is no civil unrest. There are no arguments in the streets, no protests. Everyone is very orderly. Everyone is very well behaved. It's amazing. Wouldn't you want to live in one of those countries? Good answer. Good answer, yes. Yeah, you wouldn't. Because let's take a sampling of some of those countries. One of them is communist China. Remember what happened there in Tiananmen Square? 1989, students rose up. All they wanted was a little more democracy. And what happened? They got mowed down in the streets. There was a lot of blood on the streets. To this day, the Chinese government does not reveal the numbers of students who were killed. They say it was like a couple of dozen. People who were there and who managed to get out of the country say it was in the hundreds. Of dead students, and thousands of others were imprisoned. Then, of course, another example is Afghanistan, where life is very orderly, especially if you're a woman. Everyone kind of minds their P's and Q's in Afghanistan. And then, of course, we have the ever-popular Democratic Republic of North Korea. You won't find much civil unrest there. You won't find people protesting in the streets because they know if they raise their voices, they will get thrown into a concentration camp or killed, one or the other. So you are right to answer that. You don't want to be in a country that has no, civil discourse, disputation, debate, because that means living in an authoritarian country, and no one wants that. So let's get back to the first answer to this question. Why are American politics so often divisive and disputatious? The answer, quite simply, is human nature. People tend to speak their mind if they have a right to do so. In America, public speech, freedom of the press, these are sacred rights. And so we exercise them. Right? This is a very human thing. This is people being people. We give our opinions, we debate, we exchange points of view. For the most part, this is a good thing. Sometimes it gets a little out of hand, but this is the first answer to our question. There are two more answers, and they complement this one. These three answers are all overlapping. They're not mutually exclusive. They all kind of shore each other up. So what does the second answer have to do with? The first one is just, human nature. What's the second answer? Well, has to do with political parties, the nature of political parties. 1789, America ratified the Constitution. George Washington was voted president unanimously by the state electors. He served 8 years. He set kind of the standard for how an American president should behave. And at the end of those 8 years, he gave his final address to Congress. And this address was printed in newspapers around the country. And in that address, he almost not quite pleads, but he urges up-and-coming American leaders not to get involved in party politics. There are no parties in 1789. There are no political parties. And George Washington believes it will be a great mistake if political parties begin to develop on the American landscape. He says this will divide the country. It will put citizens at each other's throats. So he appeals to leaders not to go down the road of party politics. Did it work? No. Even as he was giving that address, there was already a group of men who, for all intents and purposes, had pretty much already formed a political party. These guys, they got together on a regular basis. We're talking about a relatively small, a handful of guys, and they got together regularly and they discussed politics. They shared their political views with each other, and they talked about what their agenda should be, what the agenda should be for the country. Well, that's a party. That's a political party. It's kind of the core definition. You don't have conventions yet. You don't have primaries. You don't have all the things we associate with political parties today. But it's still a political party, a group of people who share the same political vision and try to implement that vision. That's the basic definition of a political party. So what did this group of men want? They wanted a strong, centralized federal government. They wanted a loosey-goosey interpretation of the Constitution. They wanted America's leaders to be well-educated, to be worldly, cultural, very intelligent people. They wanted an increasingly industrial economy. They said this will be good for America if we follow Great Britain's example. Great Britain had plunged into the led the way with the Industrial Revolution. And these leaders felt America should follow suit. They wanted extensive international trade deals, as many trade deals with as many countries as possible. And they wanted a national bank to kind of anchor the economy. These were their goals. This group of men were known as the Federalists. And over time, they became known as the Federalist Party. And the leader of the party was none other than Alexander Hamilton. Now, Washington, some people say, well, Washington was more or less a Federalist. He never called himself a Federalist. George Washington always strove to be above party politics. He never joined any faction. Although, to be, truthful about it, he did agree with a lot of the Federalist policies. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Well, there was a group of men in America led by these two guys, who I'm sure you recognize, and they disagreed with Alexander Hamilton. They said big, powerful central government is not the way to go. That would be bad for America. This is what Jefferson and Madison believed. So they got together and they formed their own political party to oppose the Federalists. And they called themselves the Democratic Republican Party, right? They joined both kind of concepts into one party label. And pretty soon, 1796, George Washington steps down. He has served 8 years very honorably. Now he has stepped down. So there's going to be an election in 1796. In the previous two elections, everyone knew George Washington was going to win. Everyone wanted George Washington to be president. But now he's out of the picture. So it's the Democratic Republicans led by Jefferson against the Federalists led by John Adams. Hamilton is kind of the top Federalist, but John Adams, is the prime candidate representing the Federalist Party. In this drawing, they have Benjamin Franklin in the background, kind of refereeing the whole thing. Well, he had died 2 years earlier. Franklin passed away in, I believe it was 1794. So he couldn't have been around to referee this election. Probably would have been better if he had been, but he wasn't. So this is how it all washed out. Remember, in those days, there was no popular vote for president. That wouldn't happen until 1824. 1824. So what you have are state electors who are choosing the president. And we will talk more about state electors in the Electoral College in a moment. But this is how, when the dust clears, this is how it looks. John Adams gets 69 of the state electors to vote for him. Jefferson falls just short. He gets 66 electoral votes. You can see on the map, the vote broke down along regional lines. Most Northerners voted for Adams. He was from Boston. Most Southerners voted for Jefferson. He was from Virginia. But Adams wins, he ekes out the election, so he becomes, under the Constitution at that time, the guy who got the most votes becomes president, the guy who got the second most votes becomes vice president. That was changed by the 12th Amendment early in the 1800s. But at this time, that's how the system worked. So for the next 4 years, Jefferson and Adams, although they belonged to different political parties, they tried to get along. They tried to kind of make the best of it. But 4 years passed, and then the election of 1800 presented itself. And this would be a huge event in American history. The Democratic Republicans were much better prepared for the election of 1800. They had spent the previous 4 years organizing and getting more people involved in Democratic Republican Party politics. Meanwhile, the Federalists had been going in the wrong direction. They hadn't been organizing. They had been arguing, and there was a lot of infighting in the Federalist Party. John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, the two foremost Federalists, they spent the 4 years getting to know each other really well. And you know what they found out? They found out they did not like each other at all. Each one considered the other one to be a royal pain in the ass. So this hurt Federalist politics. This hurt them going into the election. And this became a very ugly election. We think of kind of, mudslinging elections as being a modern phenomenon. They are not. This election was as down and dirty as it gets. Jefferson's people said horrible things about Adams and the Federalists. And Adams's people said horrible things about Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. So it got really nasty. By the time the dust settled, this is how it ended. Jefferson took down 73 votes. Adams got 65. He fell short. And so he was not going to be the vice president. Aaron Burr he was another Democratic Republican, and he got more votes than John Adams. So John Adams wasn't even going to be the vice president. And then something incredible happened. After the election, John Adams and the Federalists peacefully transferred power to Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. This is one of the first, maybe the first time in human history that one political faction handed power over to another political faction peacefully. No one was killed. No one was thrown into prison. No one was exiled out of the country. None of that happened. This is an incredibly rare event. Remember the Roman Empire, one of the greatest empires in world history. One of the things that brought the Roman Empire down was they couldn't transfer power peacefully. Read up on Roman history. So many times when an emperor died, there was this vicious, and I mean, blood-shedding conflict to take the emperor's place. People were slaughtered. Armies went to war. This happened over and over and over. It's one of the things that brought down the Roman Empire. They could never develop a peaceful system of transition. This is true for many, many countries and empires around the world. But in 1800, Jefferson and Adams showed the world that it could be done. And we've been doing it ever since in America. We've been having the peaceful, the peaceful transfer of power. Not necessarily a pretty transfer of power, gentle and, everyone's kissing each other on the cheek. No. It gets bitter, it gets snarly, but no one is killed when one party in America transfers power to another. And it all started with the election of 1800. That's why some historians call this the Revolution of 1800. The revolution was that America showed itself and showed the world that this is possible. It's possible for human beings to do this. Now, having said all that, was Adams was he in a good mood when he lost the election? No, he wasn't. He was mad. He was bitter. He was miserable. He refused to attend Jefferson's inauguration. He was while Jefferson was being sworn into office, Adams was on a carriage on his way back to Boston. He would never see Thomas Jefferson again. They would renew their friendship, but it would be a long-distance renewal. So there was bad blood, no question about it. But I say again, it was a peaceful transfer of power. That was the amazing thing about this election. So clearly, we saw the Democratic Republicans demonizing the Federalists. We saw the Federalists demonizing the Democratic Republicans. And political parties have been doing that ever since. Political parties tend to want to make opposing parties look like the bad guys, portray them as dangerous and harmful to the country. That's just the nature of politics. And so this brings us to the second reason why politics in America are so often divisive and disputatious. Number one, of course, is that it's human nature. Number two is that it's the nature of political parties. Political parties try to make opposing parties seem dangerous and harmful. That's just the way business is done. Sometimes it gets a lot uglier than it should be, and that's when things get nasty and people become very vituperative and things seem irreconcilable. But nevertheless, that's the nature of party politics. So now there's one more reason why American politics are so divisive today. And it has to do specifically with the development of the party system in America. And this is a little more complex, so hang in there, stay with me as we go through this. In our last talk, we looked at America 1789, the year the Constitution was ratified. And we noted that America's political leaders, they weren't so comfortable with democracy. They didn't trust democracy. They were liberals in the classical Lockean sense, but they had lots of forebodings about having a general democratic vote, allowing ordinary people to vote for president. That would not do in their minds. That would lead to chaos, they thought. So they tended to be conservative. Excuse me, one moment. So we noted that at this time, only white men who owned property could vote. That meant about 5 to 10% of the population voted in any given local election. Even most white men could not vote because most white men did not own property. So, 90% of the population was left out of the process. But over the years, over the generations, the franchise was gradually expanded so that more and more people were allowed to vote. Until today, we have, virtually all adults in America can vote. Doesn't matter what your, race, your sex, your religion, none of that matters. So our democratic republic has evolved over the past couple of hundred years. Now, back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the political parties were managed by political managers. You could call them bosses if you want. That's kind of a heavy-handed word, but they were managers. And they made the decisions about what their party platform was going to be and who the party's candidates were going to be for senator, for president, for any local office. So these meetings were attended. They were closed meetings. They were attended by inside members of the party, elitists, the leaders of the group. They were allowed to attend these caucuses. No one else was. And their goal, and I want to really emphasize this, was to develop a moderate party platform, put forth a moderate candidate that most electors could vote for. That was the goal. The key was moderation. The key was, having practical, down-to-earth, achievable political goals. Now, keep that in mind. This is a really crucial point. This is what the early parties strove for, because they were managed by a small group of men who tried to be very level-headed, tried to be very practical, okay? Now, many American citizens objected to the party caucus system. They said it's too few people making decisions for everyone else, everyone else who belonged to the same political party. They said it should be a more open, a more inclusive system. More ordinary citizens should be allowed to be involved. And they, got angry about this. Well, one party, one obscure party, was listening to these grievances. It was the anti-Masonic Party, not a very well-known party in American history. They didn't last for very long. But what they did something in 1831 that no one else had ever done. They held an open convention. They said, we're going to meet, for this weekend in, I forget where the convention was, Pennsylvania or somewhere. And if you want to attend, if you want to be a member of our party, you are welcome to join us. They flung open the doors and they invited people in. So this was a big step in the development of American political parties. The Democratic Republicans, the Whigs, other groups they noticed. They noticed this change. And they saw that it swelled the number of people who wanted to join the anti-Masonic Party. So Democratic, Republicans, Whigs, other parties followed suit. So now the party system became more inclusive. More people could get involved in participating candidates, working out a platform, in selecting nominees and working out a party platform. But we have to remember, we're still in the 1800s. It is very difficult. If you live in Boston, and if your party's convention is going to be held in, Atlanta, well, it is very difficult to get from Boston to Atlanta in the mid-1800s. You can do it, but it's hard. Traveling by wagon hundreds of miles is just a bone-jarring experience. And not many people were up to it. Not many people could afford it, right? So even though now you have the era of open conventions, most party members still cannot attend. They can't get there. It's too far away. Okay? So this leads to the election of 1912. This is the first election where you really see state primaries being held. This is a new wrinkle in American politics. People who can't get to a convention that's being held in another state can still get to a primary vote that's being held in their own state. Now, not all the states have primaries, only a few do, but this is the beginning of the development of the primary system. This is how it started. And it expanded the number of people in a party who could participate in developing the party's platform and choosing the party's nominee. Then came, from 1912 to 1968, the primary system, the state primary system for each political party became more and more important, became gradually more significant with each election, all the way up to 1968. This was a game changer year. That we could spend hours talking about the political significance of all the things that happened in 1968. We don't have hours, obviously, so I'm going to cut it down to the basics, right? 1968, one word, Vietnam, okay? And I said Vietnam, and I see the look in a lot of faces. You remember, right? A lot of you remember. You lived through it. Vietnam was a disaster in so many ways. It was a disaster for the poor people of Vietnam. It was a disaster for all the young American men who had to go there, and 60,000 never came back. Tens of thousands of those who did were scarred for life, crippled for life. It was just an awful experience. I won't get into the politics of the war, but suffice to say that by 1968, many Americans increasingly were getting mad about the war. They saw more and more flag-draped coffins coming home. And they thought, these young Americans are being sent to fight in a war in this little Asian country, literally on the other side of the globe. Really, does Vietnam pose a threat to America? Really? This is the question more and more Americans were asking. And ordinary Americans were increasingly turning against the war. Well, Eugene McCarthy, little-known senator from Minnesota, outside Minnesota, most people have never even heard of him, but he is angry about the war. He believes it is morally wrong, politically wrong, and he says it's got to end. So what does he do? He enters the New Hampshire state primary in March of 1968. He challenges his own party's president for the nomination to become the candidate for president in 1968. Political analysts, they see McCarthy as he's like a voice in the wilderness. He doesn't have a snowball's chance. No one takes him seriously. But he tells the voters of New Hampshire, the Democrat voters of New Hampshire, if you vote for me, I'm going to do everything I can to get America out of that war. He doesn't say he's going to immediately pull all American troops out of Vietnam. That's a popular belief, but it's not true. He said he would do it in an orderly, organized, negotiated manner. But he said, this is my goal, to get America out of that, nightmare. He ends up getting 42% of the vote. This is an earthquake in Democratic politics. Johnson got 49% of the vote. He still won, political analysts thought he was going to get 90% of the vote, if not more. So this was considered a win for Eugene McCarthy, even though technically he didn't win. But getting 42% of the vote in New Hampshire, this was a huge upset. And it was devastating for Johnson. And so a few weeks later, March 31st, I'm sure some of you remember this night, when he appeared on national TV and said, "I will not seek and I will not accept." This was another political earthquake in America. Very few people saw this coming. So this was a big deal. And it seemed to clear the way now for Eugene McCarthy to become president. Now, a couple of weeks after McCarthy won in New Hampshire, Robert Kennedy jumped into the race. And that's one of the reasons why Johnson stepped out, because he absolutely hated Bobby Kennedy. And the idea of losing to him was just unbearable. Just the thought of it was unacceptable. So that's one big, not the only reason, but one big reason why he bowed out of the race in '68. So Robert Kennedy joins the race. He quickly becomes the front runner for the Democratic nomination. Eugene McCarthy is furious at RFK. He calls him a coward. He says, "You're a coward. You didn't get into the race until I showed in New Hampshire that LBJ could be defeated. And then when you saw that, then you got into the race." So McCarthy was livid at Bobby Kennedy. And then, of course, just a couple of months later, June 4th, right, 1968, Bobby's gunned down in LA. So McCarthy was not happy. I shouldn't have followed that photo with this one. McCarthy was genuinely grief-stricken for Bobby Kennedy. He was angry at him as a colleague, as a political kind of rival. But when he heard that Kennedy had been killed, he was really devastated. McCarthy was, really just in tears. So, but this did clear the field for him to win the nomination, the Democratic nomination. His only competition was Hubert Humphrey, who was the vice president of the United States. And it was clear he was running for president, although he didn't even bother entering a lot of the primaries. But it was clear, everyone knew he was going to run. And he seemed to be Johnson's kind of chosen person to carry on the Johnson legacy, even though Johnson did not support Humphrey until very late in the race. He didn't come right out and say, "Humphrey's my guy," until months later. So Humphrey, he's pretty much playing it cozy and cagey. He's kind of staying out of things. He doesn't enter most of the primaries. But Eugene McCarthy is entering the primaries. He is getting votes. And going into the Democratic convention in Chicago in '68, it looks like McCarthy is the man. He's doing the work. He's going through the states. He's making speeches and doing that. But then they get to Chicago, the big convention, and all the side, look at Humphrey everywhere. It's like the inner, I hate to make it sound so conspiratorial, but it was like this cabal of Democratic managers had already decided Humphrey was going to be the guy. It didn't matter that McCarthy was doing all the work, going through all the states, winning primaries. That didn't matter. What mattered is Hubert Humphrey had a better chance of beating Richard Nixon in a nationwide election. And that's true. He did. McCarthy was pretty much a one-party candidate, not strictly speaking, but for the most part. He would have been demolished by Nixon in a national election. Humphrey had a nationwide program. So he would have stood up better against Nixon, matched up better against him. So that's why the Democratic Party managers chose Humphrey to be their guy. Well, this unleashed a firestorm in Chicago. Now, to be clear, people were already rioting outside the convention hall. People were already, it wasn't the people so much who were rioting. There were troublemakers, make no mistake about it. There were a lot of yippies and rabble-rousers in the streets. But it was the Chicago police who really turned it into a riot. They just came out with clubs swinging, and it got very, very bloody on the streets of Chicago. But it was very stressful, very intense, very ugly inside the convention hall too. You didn't have people, having their heads split open or anything like that. But you had a lot of angry people, especially the McCarthy people, especially the younger people. They were furious. Many of them said, so this is how politics is done, huh? We work for votes, we go through the primaries, we do the procedure, we get to the convention hall, and you've already picked a different candidate. Doesn't matter what the rank and file voted. So this is what enraged so many people in Chicago. Party leaders took note of what happened. This was just an ugly, awful event. And so they decided this must never happen again. So what did they do? They changed a lot of the rules of the political party rules about how a candidate would be chosen. And they also increased the number of primaries that were going to be held before the convention itself. So there were substantial reforms in both parties. The Democrats started the reforms, and then the Republicans followed suit. They realized they too had to try to be as transparent as possible to avoid another Chicago. So this is a key moment in the development of political parties in America. And what is the net result? The net result is that the power of party managers, right? These are the elites, these are the experts, the analysts. Their influence on the parties gradually goes down. And who takes their place? Activists. Activists. Now, remember what the goal was of the managers? For hundreds of years, their goal was moderation. Develop a moderate platform that most of the country could agree with. Put forth a moderate candidate that most of the country could say, he or she seems reasonable. I'm willing to vote for that person. The goal was moderation. But now, activists take the stage. Activists, almost by definition, are not moderate. They are very ideological. Now, some activists are very practical. Some activists just work to get out the vote. They're not driven by ideology. But generally speaking, activists tend to have this ideological vision of what the country could be, should be, and they push the party toward that vision. And that's true for the right wing, it's true for the left wing, true for both. And that's what's been happening since 1968 in America. In the political primaries, activists, who are the loudest voice in the room, usually, they push the Democratic candidates further to the left. They say, if you want our vote, if you want our support, and mind you, we are the loudest people in the room, you have to go further to the left. And right-wing activists say the same thing. They tell Republican candidates, if you want our vote, you've got to push farther to the right. And that's a crucial reason why the American primary system tends to be rather polarizing. You notice after the primaries are held, the candidates, usually on both sides, quickly try to move to the middle. They quickly start sounding more like moderates. You see this over and over and over. Not always, but usually you see that pattern in American power. And this is the reason why, because the activists, the people who will get up and scream and protest and yell and push, they're the ones driving the primary buses, usually, more and more in American politics. And it has that, ultimately, it has a divisive effect. So, what is our third answer to the question, why are American politics so often divisive and disputatious? Number one was it's just human nature. Number two was it's just the nature of political parties. Number three is ideologically driven party activists tend to push divisive agendas. So these are the reasons why American politics are so often divisive. And to be fair, this is true for most democracies in the world. Democracy tends to be messy. The alternative is authoritarian orderliness, which no one wants. So now, we mentioned the electoral system. This is another topic we could spend 5 hours on, but we're going to go through the crucial basics very quickly. How did it develop? Where did it come from? Well, it came from the Constitution of the United States in 1789. And they decided the president would be chosen by special electors. The Constitution never uses the phrase Electoral College. You never see that in the Constitution. What it uses is that word electors or state electors. These would be special electors. They would be chosen by the state legislatures of each state, and they were expected to be wise, well-educated, independent individuals. That was kind of the criteria. All right, this is 1789, 1792, 1796, 1800, on and on. Now, the number of electors that each state would get would be equal to the number of its senators and House members. The number of state electors that each state was allotted was equal to the number of people they had in Congress. This is the only system the small states, Delaware, Rhode Island, Connecticut, this is the only system those small states would agree to. Why? Because they could do the math. They did the math, and they realized that under this system, small states match up far better to big states than they would otherwise. So we're going to go over the math very quickly, just as an example. The math holds true for any two states. I'm going to choose the two most extreme states to really contrast the difference, okay? So stay with me on this. Vermont, little Vermont, has about 640,000 people. So few people, Vermont only has one congressional representative in the House, just one, because their population is so small. So they have one member of the House, and they have two people in the Senate, just like every other state, right? So altogether, that means they get 3 electoral votes. They have 3 people in Congress, so they get 3 electoral votes, okay? Now, let's look at California. California has 53 people in the House of Representatives, and they get 2 senators just like everyone else. Altogether, 55. They have 55 members of Congress, so they get 55 electoral votes. So let's compare. Vermont gets 3 electoral votes for president. California gets 55. California gets 18 times more votes than Vermont. Now you're thinking, well, how the hell does that help Vermont? How does that help the little states? They're getting clobbered, 18 times more votes. Well, look at the alternative. If you go by sheer population, right? Vermont has 640,000 people, give or take. California has 40 million people. Compare. California's pool of potential voters is 60 times bigger than Vermont's. Not 18 times, 60 times. So if we went by a national popular, one person, one vote system, Vermont would get clobbered. The small states would be destroyed by the big states. Now, in 1789, this was of real concern because states tended to vote as a block. You only had a small number of voters to begin with, and states in 1700s, 1800s, distance mattered. States tended to be isolated from other states. So states did tend to vote as a block, okay? But that changed over time. So just to sum up that point that we just made, the Constitution's electoral system gives smaller states more electoral clout than they would have with a direct popular vote, okay? Now, let's go further. In 1804, the only special state electors could vote for president, and that determined that most states tended to vote as blocks, right? But over the years, things began to change. More and more Americans felt like the Electoral College had served its purpose, but it no longer seemed to be so relevant. Why can't we have a one person, one vote national system? Why can't we do that today? So a poll was taken, a very influential Gallup poll was taken in 1966. 63% of Americans wanted to abolish the Electoral College. So, Senator from Indiana, Birch Bayh, some of you may remember him, he wrote up an amendment, constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College. Richard Nixon in 1969 embraced the amendment. He said, I'm for it. It's time for America to go to a national one-person, one-vote system. It went to the House of Representatives. They passed it by 339 to 70. Overwhelming win for this amendment. Not all, but like 75% of the state legislatures said they would vote for it when it came to them. They would vote to pass this amendment. So it all came down to the Senate. And what did the Senate do? They voted 51 to 49 to pass it. But that's not enough. In a vote for a constitutional amendment, you have to have a 2/3 vote to pass it. So they were 16 votes short. Why was the Senate against it? Everyone else was for it. Why did the American Senate vote against it? Most of the votes came from the South, Southern senators. There had been during the Great Depression, there had been a huge migration of black people mostly to the northeastern cities. Some of them did go out west, but most of them went to the upper Midwest or the Northeast. So this really swelled the size of the northeastern American cities. Southern senators, Southern white Democratic senators, felt that if you had a one-person, one-vote national system, it would give the cities a big advantage. That the cities would win they would determine who the next president was going to be. And that's why they voted against it. Now, does that reasoning still stand? Let's look. Let's answer this question now. Why doesn't America switch to a national popular vote for president. There are 4 reasons that are usually given. We'll get through them as quickly as we can. Reason number 1, the Electoral College system reduces the advantage that big states have over small states. Well, we just got finished saying that, right? This was true in 1789. It's no longer true today. Why? Because people do not vote according to a state plan. People in any given state don't vote as a 85, 90% block. It just does not happen. It could happen in 1789, could happen in 1800, but today there's no way it would ever happen, not even close. We just had a presidential election, right? Year and a half ago, something like that. California, bedrock, liberal, democratic state, right? You know how many votes, what percentage of the vote Kamala Harris got? 58%. That's not a block vote. That's not 80, 90% of the vote. 58% is, she won. I mean, that's a healthy surplus, but it's not a block vote. People in states, if we abolish the Electoral College in favor of a popular vote for president, the people of each state would not vote as a unified bloc. People vote according to their individual consciences, not according to a state plan. So this argument is no longer true. It was true at one time, but it's no longer true today. A national vote for president would not give big states an advantage over small states. Now, concern number 2, the Electoral College system keeps big cities from dominating an election. This is what happened in the '69 vote when the Senate voted against the amendment to abolish the Electoral College. They said big cities will rule, they'll rule us all. Well, at first glance, this seems like, yeah, that's probably true. Because according to the Census Bureau, about 80% of Americans live in urban areas. So it stands to reason that urbanites would dominate national elections, right? No. Here's the problem with this logic. According to the Census Bureau, you know what constitutes, according to the Census Bureau, what constitutes an urban area? If you have a municipality with 50,000 or more people in it. You know what that means? That means Newton, Massachusetts is an urban area. Have you driven through Newton lately? Take a drive through. Tell me how many tenements you see. Tell me how many, skyscrapers, how many urban areas you see in Newton. Newton is a beautiful, leafy suburb. It's not an urban area, no matter what the Census Bureau says. The truth of the matter is, if you take the 50 largest cities, and I'm talking about real, truly urban areas, Houston, Chicago, LA, you take all of those 50 largest cities, it constitutes about 15% of the US population. And that's roughly equal to the number of Americans who live in farm areas. It's about 15%. The number of people who live in urban areas is roughly equal today to the number of people that live in urban areas. Urban and rural, right. Where is everyone else living? Living in suburbs, like Wellesley, like Natick. Most Americans today live in suburbs. So this means cities would not dominate a national election. Also, again, just like people don't vote according to a state plan, they don't vote according to a city plan either. People tend to vote their own conscience. New York City, right? Liberal stronghold. They just voted for a socialist, right? Socialist mayor. Donald Trump got millions of votes in New York City. He lost, but he still got a lot of votes. People vote their own mind, their own conscience. It's not like everyone in the city votes a certain way. It just does not happen. So a national vote for president would not give big cities an advantage over other areas. Concern number 3, the Electoral College system prevents a candidate from winning an election with only a small percentage of the vote. This is a valid concern. You can have, under the current Electoral College system, it is impossible, mathematically impossible, to get the minimum number of electoral votes to win the election without getting at least 39% of the popular vote. That's what happened when this guy was elected president in 1860. He got 39.7% of the popular vote, but he got enough electoral votes to win the presidency with 39% of the popular vote. You can't win the presidency with fewer than 39% under the Electoral College system. Now, let's look at if we just did it one person, one vote, right? Let's say you have 5 candidates for president, and this is how the vote breaks down. This could happen. You have the front runner with 22% of the vote. Does anyone want a president who only managed to get 22% of the popular vote? Of course not. So how do we get around this problem? We institute an election runoff. This is done in some other countries around the world. In this system, let's go back to that theoretical election result we had a moment ago, where you have, this is the breakdown. Well, if this were the case, you would have a follow-up election in which only candidates A and B were allowed to run, the top 2 vote getters in the general election. Only they could run in the runoff election. And that would guarantee that the winner would get at least 50% of the vote. And that's how you avoid the problem of having a president who only got 25% of the vote. So a national runoff would keep anyone from winning with less than 50% of the vote. Finally, concern number 4, a national popular vote would give the Democrat Party an advantage. Well, folks, we just had an election, 17 months ago, whatever it was, and Donald Trump won, the Republicans won a majority of the popular vote. Trump put together a coalition of working class white people, socially conservative black people, Catholic Latinos who tend to be socially conservative, and business-friendly Asians. That's the coalition Trump put together, and it worked. He got 50.1 or 50.2, something like that, percent of the vote. So if the Republicans can hold that coalition together, or some form of that coalition, the 2-party system can be very healthy going into the future. You can have vigorous, close elections between Democrats and Republicans. There's no reason why one has to dominate the other. So I hope that deals with the 4 concerns. There you see them. These are the reasons that are most often given for why we have to keep the Electoral College. I hope I've kind of answered all 4 of these concerns, because I think it is time we go to a national, in my own humble opinion, I think it would do well for America to go to a national one vote, one voter, one vote system. One thing I would love to see going forward is more moderation. I'm an independent. Full disclosure, I'm an independent. I haven't belonged to either party in decades. But what I like, and I have really wonderful friends in both parties. What I ask of both of them, both groups of friends, is more moderation, more willing. A moderate, by definition, is willing to listen. They have their beliefs, they can be very firm in their beliefs, but they have an open mind too. And they're willing to listen. And beyond that, they're willing to discuss issues in a reasonable way. They're not so quick to pull insults out of their holster and call you, the other guy evil, or you're a Nazi, or you're a communist. That's what we need more of in America today: more moderation, more reason, more civility. I hope that's in our future, but my crystal ball is broken, so I don't really know what's in our future. So I hope we went a little bit over, but we still have a little bit of time for questions, if anyone. Okay, I'm going to start with this.
You made the comment that we've always had a peaceful transition in our presidential election.
Well, with the exception of the Civil War, yes.
No, with the exception of January 6, 2021, people died at the Capitol,
That is true. You're right. You're absolutely right. I stand corrected.
and that was caused by an immoderate president.
You're right. True enough. I cannot dispute that. Yes.
What about ranked choice voting?
That's another possibility. Yeah, that's another road. That's another alternative to solve that problem of.
Okay, and the other thing you didn't talk about is the Electoral College compact. You know about that? That's where if enough states would agree that they would throw their Electoral College votes to overrun the popular vote in
28 states have voted for that, right? Yeah. And more are kind of jumping on the bandwagon. Yeah, so
that's a way around.
that would solve the problem. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Now, okay.
It's in the same neck of the woods. You mentioned about a runoff.
Yeah.
And I thought the Constitution said if you didn't get the right, let's say 270 electoral votes, it goes to the House of Representatives.
It does.
To determine the president. But what you're saying was a runoff.
Yeah, because under that system, you wouldn't have an electoral college anymore.
Oh, you were not talking about the Constitution.
Right, right. Yes.
So we had left-right polarization throughout the world,
Yep.
and yet we all live in the same world with the same issues. What we have, I think, is people perceive the issues differently. That would be a psychological difference, and I wondered if you know of any efforts to identify what the psychological differences are.
Were you here for last week's talk?
Yes.
Yeah, we did break down how liberals tend to differ from conservatives in 4 key areas. I don't know if that speaks to the psychological differences that you're referring to.
Not really.
You're talking about personality types?
Personality, authoritarian personality, they behave generally different from liberal personality.
Yeah,
They need a leader, one leader to follow.
Yeah.
Liberals, you can't.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we did kind of speak to that with that breakdown that we had last week. And I mean, I can represent it at some point if you're interested. Yes.
Are you going to address the issue about, the vote used to be own property?
Right.
But it's been very, very apparent that there's systematic policies to keep. And then currently there's, how can, I think have one person for one vote. It seems there's movement to prevent one person. I hope you address it.
Well, I think I agree. I think we need a more transparent voting system. We need a system that has a lot of observers on site, on voting night, a system where the vote is tabulated in an open and honest way, so that we can all kind of see how the vote is being counted and how it's being assessed and so forth and so on. People at the voting booths to make sure that no one is turned away, to make sure there's no intimidation of any kind. We definitely need more transparency in the voting system.
I'm talking about the lead
So what would you foresee as the lead up to?
Well, I mean, there were polling places that were reduced substantially.
There weren't enough workers to manage the polling place.
They just closed them. There was no shortage. There were in certain areas, like areas, that the polls were closed, so it's more difficult.
Yeah.
There were systematic, the date and the change, and the early voting. People on a Tuesday are often working. The working class people are working vote by mail. There has been systematic right now to keep that. Like my brother-in-law is
Right.
difficulty. He has difficulty in a different state getting in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
My sister cannot take his ballot to her election.
Right.
Place.
Right.
So that used to be fine if somebody's disabled. Because I mean, there's a lot of ways.
Sure. Sure. But I think all that falls under the goal of reform toward transparency, eliminating problems like fixing problems like the ones you've specified.
Undone, I'm saying. But like a couple, 5 years ago, things were better. It's being undone, it's being.
Okay. And no one is working to stop that from happening. Is that what?
There's people that are working to.
All right. Is there anyone working to stop it?
Let's just put it right out there.
Okay. If you have a problem like that, right, where there's in somewhere in Georgia, there is this 50 square mile area with no voting booth, none. So someone in Georgia goes to the New York Times. It says, this is a problem here. Wouldn't the New York Times, wouldn't the Washington Post, wouldn't the Boston Globe, wouldn't CNN say, wow, this is a problem, let's fix it?
They're not fixing it.
Okay.
Everybody says this is a problem, but they don't have the means because we're in the minority. The Supreme Court, Congress, and Trump's gang. I mean, you hear what they say, the Department of Justice, this one was a terrorist, we're being gaslighted. And where do you go to fix it?
Well,
I'll do one thing.
yeah.
You know how Holman said, we're gonna take 700 ICE out of. Well, he doesn't say the next sentence. If you promise not to protest anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Gaslighting? Because you never hear Holman saying that.
Yeah. I want to stick with this issue of polling. Maybe I'm, absurdly naive, but, and maybe that's true, but I believe that if I'm a journalist sitting at my news desk at the Globe or the Georgia Daily, and someone presents this problem, and I look into it and I find out, oh my God, it's true. There's no voting area within 50 miles of this town. I'm going to be moving heaven and earth. If I have any ounce of conscience and goodwill, I'm going to be doing everything I can. And I know for a fact, I have liberal friends who work in the business. They would, they'd be out there like night and day saying, this is wrong and this has got to be fixed. And I don't know anyone who wouldn't take up the cause.
They've been saying that, they've been documenting
let me look into it. Let me look into, because CNN would be their lead news story. CNN has gone to the right. Jake Tapper has.
They're going, not specific individuals, but the people who own or run.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Pay attention.
Oh, well, you first.
I just have a request.
Sure.
I'm sort of hard of hearing, and I would appreciate it if you could have
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. Yeah, my bad.
what's going on.
Yeah, my bad. Well, let me start with, do you have a question? You did not. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm just mentioning that money and media are the hidden element that influences results more than ever before. You get a campaign for the Senate in Maine with the ex-governor running. The Republican Party comes in with $500 million to change the conditions. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, it is. There's no question about it. Money plays a huge role in politics, but it did in 1900 too. Remember the billionaires, the Gilded Age, they owned Washington pretty much. So it was pretty evident then too. Some would say it was more evident then.
But the recent Supreme Court decision that allowed PACs on credit is what made this explode. Mm-hmm. It was only a half dozen years ago.
Yeah, that's true. But remember that works for like George Soros as well. I mean, he gets to contribute more to his people as well.
But you add up all the billionaires in this country and whether they're on the right or the left. Soros might be on the left, but virtually all the others are on the right.
Okay. Yes.
You say the journalists can get information out. How about the journalist that was raided by ICE and her laptop was confiscated, her watch was confiscated,
Okay.
and they didn't have a warrant?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
A comment about restricted voting that I heard sometime, I think it was like 6 months ago, in the state of New Hampshire, that if a woman goes to register to vote in New Hampshire, this doesn't affect women who are already registered to vote, but if you go to register to vote, you need to bring your birth certificate. And if your birth certificate doesn't match your name, you need to bring evidence of why you have a different last name than on your birth certificate. And the woman who brought that to the press must have gone in by the deadline to vote, to register for a particular election, and didn't have enough time to go find, presumably, her marriage license so that she could register to vote, and she did not vote in that election. But that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Another reason to keep your name.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have just a couple more. Yes, one more.
It's not news that there's voter suppression. I pay my dues to League of Women Voters. I'm not active in the group, but I get their mailings, and there is an entire section about voter suppression going on right now. So you could look at that, and that was just a start. And there is Texas. I'm like so overwhelmed I can hardly think of all the things, but like in Texas, that they were supposed to oversee elections, and then the Supreme Court, they're trying to, because they had the burden of proof to try to say in the state of Texas, there was Supreme Court decisions. So I don't want to take up too much time, but there's a lot of evidence about very serious voter suppression.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, one last question. Here we go.
Not so much a question, but just a comment that one improvement in voter suppression could be, as other countries do, having a national holiday for voting. You would get the potential for a lot more people. I'm sure it would take moving mountains to make that happen, but it's so obvious,
That's a pretty good idea, I think. Okay. Well, I thank you all for being here today. As I said in our next talk, thank you. In our next talk, we'll look at the state of the world. No small feat, but we'll try to get through it in 48 minutes. Thanks again.